Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m. on June 23rd, 2025. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee for the Lisle Community Unit School District 202. First up is public comment. We do have a person who would like to speak today. Mr. Hummel, if you'd please come forward.
How you doing? Tom Hummel, 824 59th Street. I won't repeat everything from last month or all the other village TIF meetings, but I just want to stress again that these TIFs, particularly the East Ogden Avenue TIF, except for the Lock former property, do not meet the but-for test. The requirement for TIFs is but-for and not inflating boundaries to get to a number that the village wants or needs. The amended agreement doesn't back out village capital projects, which they said at the last joint review board that they will do, and they will pay for those capital projects. That alone should reduce the size of the TIF. We can't worry about what may or may not happen someday in the future to existing businesses. What ifs are not criteria for creating a TIF. Also, TIFs can be expanded easily in the future if it's absolutely needed. The village hasn't discussed using sales tax revenue within the TIF, which is permitted by state law to help pay for expenses. The purpose of TIFs is to encourage new economic development, which in turn should create additional sales tax revenue. That new revenue should be included in the TIF district. Previously, the one property that I haven't really mentioned is the post office property, which is tax-exempt property. If that property were to ever be redeveloped in the future, my understanding, the taxing bodies would receive $0 based on no EAV, and all new property tax would be in the TIF. For full disclosure, what I just said regarding the post office does need to be verified, but 10 years ago, when I asked about the fire station in the downtown TIF, which is also tax-exempt property, I was told that was the case. All property tax would go into the TIF. Regardless, this property needs to be pulled out of the TIF, especially if taxing bodies were to receive $0 in property taxes from a new development. Also, regarding the offer of up to 2% increase in EAV by parcel is a bad deal. That's nothing. You will get that at least without a TIF. Anyway, without a TIF. Foregoing the higher EAV with the new Quick Trip gas station alone makes this a bad deal. So tonight, I ask you to stand for what's right and stand up for your residents and oppose the size and scope of the proposed TIF districts. As I've stated in the past, the Lock former property and the vacant property south of the Hyatt on Route 53 are perfectly fine to place in a TIF, but the rest should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hummel. We appreciate you coming forward. All right, then. So that would bring us to the third item on the agenda, which are the minutes for the May 20th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting. Does anyone have any questions, changes, comments? No? Excellent. So we are in agreement the minutes accurately reflect the May Finance Committee meeting? Excellent. All right, so on to item 4. The Working Cash Fund Interest Transfer Resolution. Information can be found under item 5A6 of the regular board meeting packet. Mr. Wilson, if you would. Mr. Wilkinson, if you would. Pardon me.
No problem. So every year the school district earns interest income on the balance that's held in our working cash fund. The school code allows the school district to transfer those monies to another fund with no requirement that they be repaid. And so historically, the board has approved transferring those dollars to, in this case, the educational fund, where those dollars can be used for salaries and other instructional costs during the course of the year. In terms of our FY25 budget, we anticipated interest income of $42,000. It looks like where we are so far in the fiscal year, that'll end up being just over $49,000. And so obviously once we finish the year, we'll calculate what those interest earnings are and transfer the full amount over to the educational fund. And so those dollars will be included in the ending fund balances for the education fund, and the administration is recommending approval of that interest transfer from the working cash fund to the educational fund. I didn't receive any questions, and it's included in the board packet for approval.
Any questions now, he said, turning on his microphone? Very good. All right, that would bring us to item 5, the Debt Services Fund Interest Transfer Resolution. Information for that can be found under item 5A7 of the regular board meeting packet. Once again, Mr. Wilkinson?
So Mr. Wilkinson would like to discuss the next transfer, which is new this year, and that's transferring from the Debt Services Fund to the Educational Fund. As we just talked about, historically, the board has approved the working cash fund transfer, but we decided to recommend this year a transfer of the interest that's earned in the Debt Services Fund as well. This recommendation is so that instead of leaving those dollars in the Debt Services Fund where we really can't use them, if we transfer those dollars over to the Educational Fund, then they can directly support those instructional needs. Although it wasn't included in the original FY25 budget, I contemplated it, but didn't actually put it in there. Actually doing this transfer now doesn't really have an effect on the budget because it's another other source and use, so it doesn't increase our overall revenues or our expenditures. But assuming the committee and the board authorizes this and approves it, we will start to include that in our budgets going forward. So it is contemplated in the FY26 budget that we'll be talking about later this evening. Again, the approximate amount is $45,900, which is what we've earned kind of so far this fiscal year, and projecting out what we'll be getting through the remainder of this month. But again, we'll transfer the full amount earned in the Debt Services Fund once we know those dollars after June 30th. And so we are recommending approval of this transfer as well, and it's included in your board packet under the consent agenda this evening. Any questions on the debt services transfer?
Thank you very much. So we are on to item 6, the pre-kindergarten transportation for, should that be fiscal year? Or is that, no, school year,
School year.
2025, 2026. The information for this can be found under item 6 of the Finance Committee packet. If you would.
So Mr. Wilson and Dr. Schreiber would like to discuss this next agenda item, which is pre-kindergarten transportation for the 25-26 school year. We are recommending, I guess, kind of to get to the end result, we are recommending that we discontinue that pre-K transportation for the midday routes only, not the AM or the PM routes, but those routes that are run separately in the middle of the day. Currently, pre-K students are permitted to ride our regular K through 5 bus routes in both the morning and the afternoon. I think for the most part, it's using established stops that are in the neighborhood. It's our regular stops that are at the corners and at various spots that we've determined to be the best location for those spots. But because pre-K is a half-day program, it does, at least so far, to provide transportation to those students, require us to run separate dedicated midday routes to bring those students in for the afternoon session and to bring students home after the morning session. These midday routes are not required by the Illinois State Board of Education for pre-K. Obviously, K through 12 transportation is required if they're over 1.5 miles from the school and or have to cross a serious safety hazard, but pre-K transportation is not required by the state, and therefore the school district does not get reimbursed for that transportation. I should add that special ed pre-K transportation is required, and we do provide that transportation for any students that have transportation specifically spelled out in their IEP. In order to run those routes in the midday, I put a table in the write-up there that shows you what those costs were for this past year. I think it was in the neighborhood of, I don't have it in front of me here, but about $1,900 a student based on the number of students that we have taking advantage of that. And with our new contract with Westway Coach for next school year, it's expected that that cost would be around $40,000 in total. The other thing we've noticed with this midday route is it does create some operational challenges for the elementary school. We have a rolling enrollment for our pre-K students, so they're constantly coming into the school throughout the course of the year. And so every time one of those students is added to the bus route, It requires us to add a specific stop for them during the midday routes because they're all home stops. And then it also adjusts all of the other stops within that route, which requires communication to the parents. If we have any kind of sub-drivers, sometimes those stops don't get on the final route. And so there's just a lot of change there that has, I think, caused some operational headaches for the elementary school as well. We also looked at, and this is included in the write-up as well, is kind of what some neighboring districts are doing. Most do not provide transportation for their general ed pre-K students unless, again, it's required by an IEP, or if they're in the state-funded preschool for all program, which we are not here at Lisle 202. In the few cases where we did see transportation, and this wasn't a survey of every district, it was just a handful of the neighboring districts that we reached out to directly. Anytime that transportation was provided for those regular students, there was typically a fee associated with that. One of the challenges for us to charge that fee is in order to make it work, we're looking at a fee of close to $2,000 for those families to use it. And if we only charged $500, and then a lot of parents didn't even want to pay the $500, then we'd be on the hook for that full $40,000. So there does create some challenges there with going to a fee-based model. There were a few questions for board members. One was, will parents need to arrange transportation home for the AM session and to school for the PM session? And if this is discontinued, that would be required. They could obviously put their student on in the morning, but then they would have to come pick them up after the morning session, and vice versa for the PM session. Another question came about how we were going to communicate this. I talked to Jill about it a little bit. There would be kind of parent square communications during student registration. It would be reinforced throughout the year as part of their preschool expectations and the enrollment process. And then another piece is we would probably work with our communications coordinator during the transition to make sure we get something out to all of those families that would be affected by this to start the 25-26 school year. Did I miss anything there? Okay. And then there was a question about the Preschool for All program. We do not participate in that program. I think we looked into it briefly, and I think the state basically said it would not be something that we would.
There's some questionable funding at this point, so I spoke to them about 6 months ago, and they had indicated that that wasn't an option for us at this point.
And then as far as our students with IEPs, we would continue to provide them transportation through Sunrise as we currently do, and so there would be no change in that regard. Lastly, there was a question about the 18 midday bus rider students. Is it correct to assume that none of the 18 students qualified for reimbursement of our transportation costs? And yes, that's correct. Again, it's not something that the state requires school districts to provide, and so they don't provide any kind of funding or reimbursement for transportation unless they're in special ed. And so it's kind of a long-winded overview of what was included in the finance packet, but we were looking for kind of feedback and consensus from the committee as to how we should proceed. Again, our recommendation is for kind of the financial cost implications as well as the operational challenges to discontinue those midday routes.
And just to kind of frame it as to the why, we've been fortunate to be financially strong for a very long period of time. As we've pointed out at the financial projection, it looks like the year we're about to start is the year that revenue and expenditures equal. And so, as we pointed out during the projection, we've got to find about $600,000 of either additional revenue or expenditures to cut. And so this is one of many conversations we're hoping to have with you over the next 6 months to be able to give parents enough upfront understanding that we may not be able to provide the services we did in the past. And so this is $40,000 of the $600,000 we're looking for. So that's the main reason we're wanting to do it. And at some point, if we're financially able to, again, we would want to add this.
And just to clarify, all the special needs children will still have the routes and we fund those through the other bus companies, correct?
Correct. And I did a couple math. Right now, we have 5 students that have IEPs that are registered for this coming year. In previous years, we've had 10 students that have IEPs. Not all of them have qualified for special transportation, but we would obviously be looking at that during their IEP meetings.
Okay, thank you.
To be clear, too, when an IEP talks about transportation, it's usually something to the effect of they are unable to ride a regular bus. And so sometimes we need to have that smaller bus because there's fewer students, fewer moving parts. And so it's rather rare that you would have an IEP that's specific to not being able to ride the regular route unless they were in a wheelchair. Like that would be an obvious.
Any more comments or questions? No? All right. Thank you,
Brings
Mr.
us no
Wilk.
joy to bring these types of recommendations, please be clear, but it is one of hopefully $600,000 of recommendations that hopefully will be manageable. And because there's so few students that are in our pre-K program, we will have those conversations with those parents. And if it really seems like we're not going to be able to have a program because parents are not able to pick up or bring their students, we will definitely bring that information back to you. So this isn't going to just be an email, by the way, things have changed. We know these families really well because there's so few of them, and they're, I don't want to say handpicked, but because it is an invite-only program, we know the students, we know what their needs are, and so, we regularly be talking to these parents, so there will be no surprises. But we didn't want to have those conversations until we were sure that you were supportive of this. Not something, I don't think they need to vote on it. This is just more of an FYI so that you're hearing it from us, letting us know if you have issues, and we will bring back if we hear a lot of information that parents just aren't able to bring their own students or pick them up.
And I appreciate the table that compared with the other districts, because it kind of gives an idea of what is more of a typical practice in our area.
And we do this regularly. I mean, we've looked at the fees regularly. That's probably the next thing we're going to have to look at. We've been fortunate enough to not have to charge fees. That may not be something we are able to continue to do. We'll have to look at class size numbers. We'll look at extended services. It's not going to be an enjoyable process, but probably one necessary for us to find the $600,000. So I think this is the first one we're bringing to you so far.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that update. Moving on. So there has been a change to the agenda. We will be moving the fiscal year 2026 tentative budget conversation up to item 7. That information can be actually found under item 8 of the actual Finance Committee packet. Mr. Wilkinson, if you would.
Could we have the presentation up on the screen? There we go. Thank you. So tonight, I will be walking through the tentative budget for fiscal year 2026.
Just before we do that, though, I want to appreciate Dr. Schreiber for joining us tonight. We believe at this point you can probably watch on your car ride home from your phone a discussion of the budget and the TIF.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flipiak. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move through things fairly quickly. We are just approving the tentative budget this evening. This isn't the final budget. Obviously, if there's any questions or anything else that comes up and we don't have time to discuss it this evening, in the interest of making more time for the TIF conversation, that can certainly be discussed in both July and August before approval in September. Just really quickly, again, tonight we're just approving the tentative budget. The final budget will be in September, and we will make the necessary posting requirements in the Daily Herald for the public hearing, which will happen at that September meeting, and the budget will be on display for at least 30 days for the public to view it. In terms of kind of at a very high level, some of those highlights, our tax levy for the 2024 levy will be contributing about $1.4 million in new revenue for the school district, but that is offset at least partially by a drop in our interest income of almost $700,000. Salary and benefit costs at this point are projected to increase by about $758,000, and the benefits will increase by $430,000 respectively. And then most importantly, we do have a balanced budget across our operating funds. And overall, when you look at all funds, we're projecting a decline of about $800,000 for the junior high renovations. That's really for that HVAC project that was previously approved. And so it is a balanced budget across our operating funds, which is obviously one of our key financial barometers that we talk about throughout the course of the year. previously mentioned our property tax revenues. Overall, they're increasing by about $300,000 across all of our revenues. And so we are seeing, particularly in the area of our federal revenues, those will be dropping as ESSER falls off. We've done the last year of ESSER. And then as well as the fact that previously mentioned interest and income earnings drop of about $700,000. Another revenue source that's been kind of up and down over the course of the years is our corporate personal property replacement taxes. At this point, I'm estimating that those to be flat, but I would mention that, you know, in the past 2 years, we've seen those drop by $400,000 and $260,000 respectively over these last 2 years. So we're hopeful that those drops have kind of steadied off here, and we'll see that income stream stay at $500,000 for next year. Also wanted to add that this does include the Chesterton and Sassid leases that are in our operations and maintenance fund, and so that contributes about $300,000 in revenue for the school district.
And this will be new news to Mr. Wilkinson, because he doesn't have it in this budget, but I got a call from Sassid yesterday. They need one more room. And so the room that I think we've met for negotiations, for the facility master planning, they need to use that room, so that'll bring in an additional $25,000. And so the reason I bring that up is that $600,000, we're just chipping away. You know, $40,000 for transportation, $25,000 more in Sassid revenue. Like, there's probably not a lot of big swings, but hopefully bringing you enough of these will get us to that balanced budget that we need for next school year. Not next school year that we're about to start, the year after.
And I do apologize for going through this relatively quickly, but I want to make sure we have time for the TIF conversation. I already touched on most of these points. The only thing I did want to mention is that, again, we look at all of these grants again kind of in August and September before that final budget is approved in September. So these numbers will change. They'll get more accurate. We go with our best estimates at this point, and so those will be reviewed again prior to the budget in September. On the expenditure side, at this point, based on kind of what we know in terms of staffing changes, retirements, things like that, even though we have those 5% increases through our collective bargaining agreements, staff turnover and some of these retirements are making that a little bit lower. So I think the increase right now, when you look at the budget from last year to this year, is maybe 2 to 3%. Again, our final budget will incorporate all the new hires, all the new staffing, where they're placed, what we're actually looking at in terms of salaries, as well as on the benefit side, because I think in the budget it's about a 4 or 5% increase on our benefits. But as you can see here, we did see, you know, nearly an 8% increase in our benefits through the EBC cooperative. Purchase services is one we've talked more and more about in recent presentations and discussions. Overall, I'm actually budgeting it to go down about $100,000. We're trying to kind of figure out where that transportation fund is going to land every year. It's really hard to budget with all the uncertainties of who's going to need transportation. But based on where we're at so far for the year-to-date actual in FY25, even though we're looking at increases in our regular transportation with Westway of 6% through our recent bid and the 4% for the special education, and then I did factor in the savings from the pre-K midday transportation we just talked about, I am looking at least now, about $100,000 decrease in our transportation costs, so that's good. Purchase services also includes all of our software renewals that we discussed at the March finance meeting. And then, I won't get into this tonight, but our Sassid cost for our aides keeps going back and forth between tuition and services and tuition and services. Now Sassid is talking about including those aid costs in the tuition costs. So we might see those actually shift over to the tuition side from purchase services. Overall, it's still going to be increasing, but it's just going to be in a different bucket on our budget. In terms of supplies and equipment, the biggest one here is our electricity costs. You may have gotten a notice at your home about the changes to the capacity charges, and there's an auction process. And so that's what we've been told as well, is that that piece of our bill is going to go up almost 10%. And so we will see an increase. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just passed straight through to the district from the whoever sets that rate. But that is going to impact the cost of our energy for this upcoming school year.
How much would that 10% be, approximately?
It's a really good question. I don't have it offhand, but I don't know. I'll have to bring that back to you. I don't have that handy.
Is it a magnitude like tens of thousands and 100? I'm just looking for a rough, I won't hold you to this, son of Wilkin.
Yeah, I would probably say at least 20,000 or so.
20,000, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's each of our buildings, I think our electricity cost is, again, I'm just going off the top of my
Yeah.
head, anywhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100,000, so
10% of that,
it
okay.
will, yeah, it will add up. It's definitely a factor in our O&M overall budget. But I'm sorry, I don't have that number.
No, it's, I
Handy.
just came to mind, so.
It's in my system.
I know it's in there at the county for sure.
Capital outlay, obviously, we have our HVAC improvements over at the junior high. And then other objects, this is the one that I think makes me the most nervous between kind of the final budget and where we end up in September. Mary Beth and Jim Nelson worked really hard to get a list of all of our students requiring special ed services, what those cost. I think we anticipated a 5% increase, and then trying to figure out all the aids that they need. But at this point, we're projecting it to increase, but not significantly. But as we know, that can change based on enrollments and things like that. And one student coming in can cost $60,000, and then if you add transportation on to that, it's another $30,000. And so, again, we'll look at this very closely as we get to our final budget. But I'm hoping that these numbers stay where they are. But if we have changes, that's where we could see some strain on our overall operating fund budget. I did get a question about TCD. We're projecting about 10 more students compared to last year, which adds about $60,000. That's a good thing. We have more students participating in the program, but there is a cost for that. And in terms of what we charge for TCD participation, that was the question I received. The general fee is $100 per course. And the only exception to that is cosmetology, which is $500 for year one and $450 for year two. But in general, we're charging students about $100 to participate in TCD. Major sources of revenues. The key thing I wanted to touch on here is that you can see property taxes is 84%. It was actually about 81% last year. So as we're seeing some of the state and federal revenues decrease a little bit, our interest income decrease, it's just showing once again how the district increasingly has to rely more and more upon local property taxes to fund our day-to-day operations. In terms of expenditures, again, salaries and benefits continue to make up the majority of those costs, nearly 70%. Purchase services represents about 15%, and it's important to note that nearly half of that is actually our transportation costs. So that's the bulk of what our purchase services are. And then in terms of other objects, that's about 10% of our overall costs, but 70% of that is made up of our public and private tuition costs. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a balanced budget in our operating funds, which is good. We have just a modest surplus this year of about $53,000. You will notice, again, I know there's a lot of numbers on that slide, really just focus on that bottom row there. The yellow number is the overall surplus across the operating funds. You will notice there's a just under $600,000 deficit in our O&M fund. That's planned. I actually lowered the levy for our O&M fund. We were starting to see those fund balances get a little bit higher relative to what our annual expenditures are. And so I actually ended up shifting some of that levy not only to our ed fund, but also over to the transportation fund. We've been trying to figure out what that balancing point is for our transportation fund, so we might end up with a little bit of a surplus this year in that transportation fund, but we'll continue to monitor that and then adjust the levy accordingly in future years. Non-operating funds, really that yellow number there, the decrease is purely because of the projects over at the junior high, so that would be expected. We are doing a little bit of a spend down in our IMRF and Social Security fund. That one's also been getting a little bit higher than we want it to be, and so we kind of have a planned deficit in that fund as well. Across all funds, again, when you factor in the other sources and uses, fund balances are going to go down about just over $600,000, but we will be well within our operating funds. We will still remain strong at approximately 5 months of expenditures in fund balances at the end of the school year. That's one of the, obviously, the components that we look at each year throughout the course of the year. I did get a question about how many cents of each revenue dollar are we spending in FY25 and FY26. I don't necessarily have very specific items on that in particular because we haven't finished fiscal year 25 yet. We're still during fiscal year 25. So I kind of went back to my projected amounts for the end of fiscal year 25 that I looked at when I was working on the financial projection. And it's roughly about 96 cents of every dollar is what we spent last year. Based on this budget with just that moderate surplus, we would be spending about 99 cents of every dollar. Almost actually about 99.9 with only $50,000 in surplus. So again, when we finish out fiscal year 25, we'll have a better idea of where we stand. But at this point, I was projecting about $1 million surplus in fiscal year 25.
And those would just be the operating funds, correct?
That's actually across all funds.
Okay.
I didn't know if the question was looking for operating or all funds.
I don't mean to disagree, but I thought we had a huge deficit in the capital projects, but you're saying even after that deficit in capital projects, we're still going to have a balanced budget?
For this year, right? For fiscal year 26?
Yeah.
No, we'll have a balanced budget within the operating funds.
Okay. And so I think the numbers that you just said, 99 cents of 100, is just talking about the operating funds. Because
Good
if
point.
it was
Thank you.
all funds, whatever that negative was on the previous slide, that would show that we're spending more than what we're bringing in
Correct.
revenue.
Yep. And so just to close, again, a balanced budget across the operating funds. We will maintain compliance with our fund balance policy. I did want to highlight our education fund realistically is breaking even for this year, for fiscal year 26. And so we are not recommending a transfer from our ed fund to the capital projects fund for those capital improvements. I know historically we have done that to the tune of $750,000, but this year, based on where our budget is, we would not recommend that. I would add, though, that this current year we're finishing up, we actually transferred about $3 million. So we transferred a lot of that $750,000 in advance. So I'm comfortable not making those transfers for a few years as we focus a little bit closer on what our overall budget is looking like. The other thing I wanted to notice is we're still getting revenue from the Tate Woods sale. So we get about $123,000 every year into our capital projects fund from basically the sale of Tate Woods that's just being paid to us in installments. And so we are still putting some money into the capital projects fund for future capital projects. And then this budget still is anticipated to preserve our financial recognition rating with the Illinois State Board of Education, and we do recommend approval at this evening's meeting of the tentative budget. Any other questions?
So I feel like in summary of the summary, this is a critical year. Like once you cross expenditures more than revenue, it is so hard to get it back in place. And for over a decade, we've had revenue over expenditures for about $2 million. And so the biggest question that we talked about at the Dave talked about it at the projection and then also in the budget is what's changed. And what's changed is special ed costs used to be in the area of 1.5 million, I think about a year ago, and now it's closer to 2.5. We can't control that. Those are the students who have the greatest need. And when you look at a normal classroom, you might have a teacher, 22 students. It's usually one teacher for one student, and it's not uncommon to have one teacher per student plus an aide. plus special transportation. It's very, very expensive. And so we're not looking to blame anyone, but that number's nearly doubled in the last year or two, and a big number. Transportation has been going up by double digits. Our insurance costs are going up by near double digits. We're seeing a decrease in the interest rates we're able to get, but yet we're still capped at inflation, which is going back to being close to that 2%. So I wouldn't say we've done anything wrong. I don't think there's anything we could have predicted, but the combination of the increase in special ed, what we're seeing in transportation, and the decrease in what we're getting in interest, all together is bringing us to that balanced budget. And I would like to personally recognize Dave for all the hard work he's been doing in this. He's putting in 60-plus hours a week, going line by line, knowing that what he doesn't want to do is to say the sky is falling, and then a year from now we're like, we're 2 million in the black again. And so he is taking each and every line, individual people, and making sure that what he brings you, even though it's in June, is as accurate as possible, because he wants you to have confidence in these numbers and not feel like we're painting worst case scenario, because we've got some hard decisions to make, and he personally doesn't want it to stick to him that we made some hard decisions we didn't have to. And so thank you for a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of stress. This is the first draft, but this is why we do the projections, and that we have someone like Dave to go to this level of detail so that we're not caught off guard a year from now and going, what happened?
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, you will always
Mr.
be
Wilson,
appreciated.
there we
I drop a kin, and that's all.
And he becomes son of Wilkin.
But you
Son of Wilkin, yes.
are, I believe as an organization, we're fortunate to have Dave because he treats this money as his own. And he wants to make sure that he can look anyone in the eye and say, this was justified. And so he's put time and effort into this. This is not a worst case scenario. And on a monthly basis, he's going to update it. And it's not to say variables won't change, but I think you can feel confident at this point. He's doing his best to have a balanced budget. And we're going to keep working with the Finance Committee over the next 6 months to make sure that we can cut the budget as much as possible without impacting our core programs.
I just want to say, we do this every year. You guys do a great job every year giving us the heads up, first time with saying, hey, we're getting really close here, but that's why we do this every year, so.
And that's why you guys have to listen to the same presentation every year, so thank you for your patience.
It's really a good presentation. It's depth enough if we all have the same sort of foresight that you've been working very diligently at, so thank you.
And so I apologize that we had to go through it so quick, but I do want to make time for the TIF conversation, which I think is the next agenda item.
I just want to add, Dave, that you don't receive compliments every year, so it's very well deserved, so thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we have to talk about the TIF, so.
We do. I've been looking at the
Move on.
clock very
One last thing
carefully.
real quick before the
Okay.
TIF. Just a question. Last year, Dr. Filipiak, you did a really great presentation about the volume and the students coming in. I think it was July. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I felt like that gave me a good informational background for decision-making. Is that something we're planning to do again? Because it sounds like we may be looking at some tough decisions. I just think that would be helpful for
When you
us.
say July, the number of students coming in, what do you mean by that?
You did a presentation last year. You had graphs, how many class sizes, where we were at. If there was like a peak at the elementary, it was coming down.
We're going to do that on an annual basis for a variety of reasons. A, for you to know, but B, for people to understand when we spend what we spend per student, they can get a perspective as there's some classes that are they're pretty low class sizes, but that's by design because those are the courses. And so I want to say that's in September when we actually have everybody, registered, starting the school
Okay.
year, but I would hope to be able to, I plan to continue to do that annually.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that'd be helpful,
It's on the
if we
planning
have to make
calendar.
some things. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further comments or questions on the budget? Excellent, good. So, moving on to item 8, which is now the proposed East Ogden TIF and Lincoln Avenue / Route 53 TIF by the Village of Lisle. That information can be found under item 7 of the committee meeting packet. Dr. Filipiak and Mr. Wilkinson, if you would please take it away.
This is complicated. We could probably spend 2 hours talking about it. And so what will try and do is kind of give the big picture with a recommendation from my perspective. And again, this is just my perspective. I think all of us in Lisle want to find success in the Lisle community. I think when we drive down roads that are Ogden eastbound towards 355, we think there's such potential here. It's like right off of 355. Like, this is prime real estate here. Like, why is this not developing? And we've seen somewhat limited growth in that area probably for a few decades now. And so to try and figure out how we can see that area grow, there's a lot of different things a village and community can do. And so let's talk about the Lock Former South site specifically. Like, that is a big piece of property, but somewhat limited as to what you can do with it, because I do believe that there was some environmental issues, and although they've been remediated, there's some real limited use. I think you can't go below 5 feet with that soil in terms of what's in place. And so you wouldn't be able to build a residential thing there. There's just a variety of things that it just wouldn't work. But there are some things like a data center, and data centers are the proverbial clouds that we talk so much about. If you go in Aurora, Naperville, I live in Aurora, when you're at 88 and I'll call it Eola, they have one that's been there for a decade, 2 more that are in the final stages. And so that's the type of thing that actually could be built on Lock Former. And so I know there's some initial conversations with the village, the Lock Former representatives, and someone who's potentially looking to build that in that area. The problem is, though, you can use a TIF, but it's not necessarily the first thing you would often do. What you would often do is meet with, I'll use specific names, Lock Former and this potential data group, and say, Lock Former, how much are you looking to sell your land for? And that person, I'm making this up, might say $100 million. And so then you might have the data company that says, well, gosh, that's a lot more than I could expect to go right to Aurora and Naperville. They're only asking for 80. And so that's really a negotiation between Lock Former and that data center to be able to say, why are you saying 100? Why do I only think 80? And you would hope at some point they would be able to figure out an agreement, an agreed upon number. If you can't do something like that, sometimes the village will come involved and say, well, tell me a little bit more. What is some of the problems here? I can't speak to why Lock Former wouldn't decrease their price, but maybe the data place says, we can't get the numbers to work. What we're going to have to do is get a second source of electricity. What we're going to need to do is get a lot of additional water to keep it cool. What we're going to need is a variety of things that may not be able to be done as easily on that site for whatever reason, may not even have to do with the type of soil. So it's not uncommon for then a village to say, well, tell you what, we're going to get a lot of utility tax from you. What if for the next, let's say 23 years, we take whatever those utility taxes are and reinvest it in that land so that, you can make the numbers work if it's a $20 million difference. The village might say something to the effect of, we have funds for that. Like, we are responsible for the tap on, the water, the sewer, like that's just part of what we do. So you can take those out of your numbers if you already included it. But if you still can't get the numbers to work, what the village could say is, we'll tell you what, you as a data center are going to be paying property taxes. We'll let you, whatever you pay in the school district's property taxes, we'll reinvest in your piece of property to get it to work. And the developer might say, well, geez, can you even do that? Wouldn't you have to talk to the school? And so that's what we're doing now, is the village is saying, we can't get the numbers to work without the property taxes from the school. And that's the but for. And that's typically where you would see the numbers to be able to say, look, this is what they want to pay as the developer. This is what they want to get as the seller. You can see there's a $20 million spread. Even when we give the utility taxes that we're generating over the next 23 years, it's not enough. Even if we use our own funds as a village to go towards a project, it's not enough. But for the school district's property taxes, the numbers work. And that's why we're bringing it to the Joint Review Board to show you that we can make this work, but for your taxes. I think it's an incredible idea to develop that area. I just have not seen the documents for the but for. When I ask questions about how much Lock Former is asking, I can't get an answer. How much is the spread in between this developer and Lock Former? I can't get an answer. How much would the utility taxes you're generating, can you put all of that towards this project? Are you still close? I can't get an answer. And so I don't know if the answers don't exist, whether they can't be shared, but I personally feel that the but for, even specifically to Lock Former, has not been something we've seen to be able to say, yeah, we feel like if you don't use the school district's property taxes, it's not going to happen. Because I think of other great projects in Lisle. We had Mark on Main. they didn't have to have property taxes to subsidize that project. Morton Arboretum Village, great development, didn't need property taxes to subsidize that development. DuPage Medical Center didn't need property taxes from the school district to subsidize that project. In fact, I think Route 53 has the Pulte homes. They did not need property taxes, although not in our district, Naperville's property taxes to subsidize that project. That may not be true for Lock Former site, if that's what we're talking about. But again, we haven't seen those numbers to be able to say, yeah, but for the property taxes that would normally go to the school, it doesn't work. The math doesn't work. And so I would propose that we pause on giving a yes until we're able to see the numbers to show the difference and why the difference. It could just be Lock Former has an unrealistic expectation. I've seen it in my community all the time, where people want a certain amount for their house, but they don't realize their house backs up to, or there's issues, and at some point they need to come to the realization, I'm not going to get what I think it's worth. And so I think those discussions have to happen first. Then I think the village gets involved. Then I think the village uses their utility taxes to be able to see if they can get the project to work. Maybe they put some sales tax in there from Bill K right next door. Like, there is a lot of avenues. And the last thing that I think would come into place is if, but for using the school district's property taxes, it won't work. And I do think had the school district not opposed the Mark on Main project, saying the but-for didn't work that time either, we would be in a much different situation, having not gotten property taxes from Mark on Main, Arboretum Village, and I'm not sure if Dooley pays, but assuming they do, like those big developments like we're talking about here, we're talking about $32 million. Like, that could make or break the services that we provide as a school district. And so I could have somebody right here probably give you the counter argument as to, well, you drove by for the last umpteen years, you're not seeing any development. If it wasn't for some sort of public subsidies, we wouldn't see the growth. That might be true too, but I don't see the information yet in dollars and cents to be able to say but for is accurate. And to be clear, there was a report from Friedman that said, well, Lock Former site is blighted. Just because something's blighted doesn't mean it solves the but-for argument. What it says is, if you can prove the but-for argument, a TIF is legal because it's blighted. But just because it's blighted doesn't mean you've proved the but-for. That's about as short as I can make this conversation. And please don't misinterpret. I personally, and I'm sure all you feel the same way, want to see growth in East Ogden. I'm just not sure we're at the point yet that the school district needs to have their property taxes be the but-for that makes that happen.
I've listened to Keith on the committee, and he's explained this several times to me, which is probably this discussion repeatedly. But each time I come back and say, what would they do with the money? Why do they need that? It comes back to the but-for question, and it's the one thing that we can't answer. So it just seems to me, in very simplistic terms, that it's kind of backwards, and this is what I said. It seems like we should have a plan, or they should have a plan first, and then this is what we would use the TIF for, and then it would, but for the TIF, we couldn't do that. And I guess I interpreted it correctly, because he said that is it, but it just, I'll use this term, it just seems to be kind of but for backwards, if you want to use that phrase, but we just don't know what the TIF is going to be used for, so.
And I don't think we necessarily agree. The village perceives, I'm speaking for them, they should be able to speak for themselves, that it appears that it's a blighted area. It appears that, according to the analysis, it qualifies to be a TIF. We'll figure out those details later. But at least the research that I've seen says that as the part of the Joint Review Board, it's our responsibility to determine the but-for before we vote yes.
And I think it makes a difference to us, especially in our current discussions, on where we would be trying to save money, and with, what we're supposed to do is to, as being a faithful protector of the of the school district's assets. I guess the other factor that we learned tonight is 84% of our, we're dependent on 84% property taxes, which is up. I mean, I think we've all used the term 80% before. So those are some of the things that I've thought about as looking at. I also thought about what we've gone through as a district in trying to do our schools. You know, LES is a perfect example after all the process with that and using bonds to do those enhancements. We'd love to do the junior high in 1 year, but we have to stretch that out because that's what we can afford. Yet we've been setting aside that $750,000 for different, you know, just planning ahead to try to make that work for us within what we have. So those are some of the thoughts that I repeated back to Keith. Am I on the right page? Am I understanding it correctly? So,
And I've heard that there's a gas station that is probably going to be part of that TIF. They're very long, you know, well into that process, which tells us the but-for is not necessary. It's my understanding, I thought it was shared at one of the joint review boards, there's been 8 contracts on the lot former site, but we don't know why they're not actually coming to fruition. So that's the type of thing that I think it would be helpful for the joint review board to hear that says, lot former is dead set on this number because of this reason. The developer can go to 5 other places for less of a price. The difference between the two is not going to be negotiated between these two parties. We need to get involved and find out if there's a way that we can close that gap to see this actually come to fruition. I think it's important the joint review board be part of those conversations, understand the gap before we say the but-for has to be the school district's property taxes.
And Dr. Filipiak, could you, I read through this red and blue responses that you had in there. Thanks for including those. But I know we talked at the last meeting about the ability to parcel it out. Because within, this is a huge chunk of area. Within that chunk, not all these areas are created equal. You're right. I mean, according to the picture that we have listed in here, you're right. There is a gas station. There's other businesses that are generating some revenue.
It's going to be a new gas station. They're building a second gas station.
Oh, but there's an existing gas station.
It is, and it'll be right, I believe it's
okay.
right across the street.
Yeah,
Mr. Hummel
yeah, on the
mentioned
corner of
that. I think he
Ivanhoe.
called it the quick trip, but I do believe there's well into the process, a second gas station being developed there because it's an ideal lot. I mean, everyone wants to be in DuPage County, in my opinion, and to be at Ogden and 355 is huge for a gas station. Nobody wants to get off, you know, and you got to drive like 1.5 miles,
Yeah.
like you're on, you're right off.
2 highways right there.
Right, being right by
Yeah.
a car dealer, maybe next door you got another car dealer. I mean, it's a prime location.
Get a Buc-ee's.
Just don't.
No, I don't think the land's big, and there's nothing big enough for a Buc-ee's
And that
around
lot former lot's pretty big. We could get a Buc-ee's on there.
there. Yeah, for, right now, what are we deciding? We're just saying if there could be a TIF here, but each individual, there'll be an RDA for each individual development, correct? That we could have further negotiations, just like we had discussed with the Family Square, to say if they have a certain number of students go above here, then we would get some funding to counter. Obviously, there's no students here, but is there room there, RDA by RDA, to get an agreement that then says, okay, and this 2%, which I didn't recall seeing any documents about this 2%, that's during.
I thought it was secondary to the conversation,
Okay.
but get ready for another 5-minute TIF summary. When you put in a TIF, the properties get frozen. Whatever's within that boundary, whatever the equalized assessed value is for the purposes of the school district, it's frozen, and it won't go up at all. And so what happens is, there's 7 of you here, let's just say Paul is now in the TIF. Next year comes, we will increase our property taxes most likely by whatever inflation is. And so it will be distributed to what used to be 7. Now you 6 are responsible for whatever Paula would have had to pay and an increase in her property value. And so when we calculated what that means for you 6, in my example, it comes to about $6 million over the next 23 years. And so you 6 would be responsible for the $6 million that Paula would have paid as a result of her EAV going up every year. And so personally, that was a major concern. It felt like there's a shift of the tax burden. Not only would you be paying inflation as an increase, but now you're also paying what Paula isn't paying. The village was wonderful in saying, well, we can do something there. The current properties in there, let's just assume every year they go up by 2%, whatever that mathematical amount is, we'll send to the taxing bodies. And if you choose, you could abate that to the other 6 in my example. That made me feel a big sigh of relief because I felt like our tax rate would go up as a result of this. The money would be going to the TIF. And so I thought that was wonderful. The village was willing to actually say 2% will go back. We could actually abate it back to the community so they weren't negatively impacted. But where the community is negatively impacted is the theory of, would this development happen anyway, if not for the property taxes? Because the village is asking for about $32 million. And so that $32 million over the next 23 years would make a huge difference in all of our budgets. Similar to Mark on Main, that initially was attempted to be created as a TIF, and as we saw, it wasn't necessary.
Is it the full 32.5 million?
Yes.
Or is it just the 20 million for the construction of public works and improvement costs?
It's the full $32 million. So if we can work with the village as a community to get that area developed without infusing property taxes, the financial benefit to the taxing bodies, most of which would be the school district, because we've got the largest tax rate, is $32 million. That would be a game changer in our budget, the same way it's been a game changer that a few of these other projects here locally didn't require a TIF. But those go further down the road in the conversation. The only thing that we need to decide is if we feel that can East Ogden be developed without utilizing school district property taxes? And if we feel like we knew the number and how close the desired purchase price versus the selling price was, and that the village already offered to utilize, because there'll be a great deal of utility taxes that come out of that data center if that's the case. If they've already looked at using some of their own property taxes, if nothing else will work other than giving school district property taxes, that's the but-for test. And at some point, it could actually be determined to be true. I just don't think we're there yet because we haven't been given that information to say, yeah, but for the school district's property taxes, this would not work out mathematically. Not to put additional weight on yourself, but this is already a done deal. There's 7 members that work on or are representative on the Joint Review Board. I do believe at this point 4 have decided to vote yes. So even if you decide to vote no, it'll still pass the Joint Review Board meeting, which is scheduled for, I believe, 3 o'clock this Wednesday. But I will either vote yes, based on your feedback tonight, I will vote no, based on your feedback, or I will, what's there in the middle, you would abstain. You may take the stance, I don't know if it would happen without school district property taxes, or I clearly think that's not, that, you just don't know. You don't have enough information, and so you could always abstain. Just saying you don't have enough information at this point to answer yes or no.
And when you vote, it's the whole big piece.
It's as currently proposed.
Oh, that's a
It's
lot of
not
space.
broken. Yeah, you're right.
That's a lot of space.
I drive by it regularly. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Selfishly, I'd love to be involved in some of those conversations because I think there's such potential. I'm just not convinced the school district property taxes are necessary at this point to close the deal. But maybe there's information I haven't seen, but would welcome the opportunity to see it, because it's my understanding that we need to determine as a school district whether or not the but-for test is passed prior to developing the TIF, not after the TIF.
And it just failed the one test out of all of them, correct?
The but-for.
Under the analyzed financial projections. Okay.
According to the internet, you're supposed to see what they call pro formas to show like this is You've seen them when, at the downtown TIF, the apartment complex there, they were able to show, look, these are the numbers, this is what we expect. You can see there's a shortage if you want us to put in a parking deck. You can see there's a shortage if you want us to do this. And so they were able to quantify the differential. I would have expected to see that type of information at this point, particularly when I think the main focus is the Lock Former site.
Did they share why there's spaces in this TIF that have developed businesses on there that are included? Because some have well-established businesses.
So ideally, when you draw a TIF, if you have a few different areas, you would like it to be all in one TIF, and sometimes there's actually developed areas in there. So the bigger ones that come to mind is there's I think it's called K, is it K Automotive? Bill K Automotive, sorry, Bill. There's also a nice commercial building there, but I think the only lessee is Dooley at this point. As mentioned earlier, the post office is in there. There's a nice strip mall, a gas station, but there's different tests that once you get to the point and you're saying the but-for to be able to say it's legal to take the school district's property taxes, and one is called the conservation. And so the conservation is really a low bar to meet. They literally just look at inflation for the last 5 years, and if those properties have not increased by at least inflation those last 3 years, there's that test. And there's another one that says that it looks like the parking lot has some cracks in it. So it really is a low test. But that's not the big test. The big test is the but-for. If you could pass the but-for, chances are you're going to find a way that it falls into one of these categories. But just because it falls in one of these categories doesn't mean it solves the but-for. That's where you need to see the financial statements and realize that gap between the two can't be closed, and the village can't use utilities, sales taxes, right? If other things they can do, it doesn't have to be just the TIF. But at some point, it may come down to that's all that's left. That's why we're asking the school district to give out potential property taxes. And but-for, this project wouldn't happen. It's hard work. I just don't think we're there yet. We haven't seen the information to say yes or no, which might be a reason you abstain.
I think if you have any time to look through, I mean, AI does a great overview of the TIF and what TIF funds can be used for. There's about 12 things that the funds that are reserved by the village or that are given to the village can be used for. There's also an analysis in DuPage County about what our surrounding communities, how many of them have a TIF. You know, Naperville, as big it is, has one active TIF at this point, but it gives kind of an overview. So a little more information on TIF that I wanted to know, but it was really a good overview to kind of give a basis for where we are and where we're headed. So.
If they can't get the numbers to work, at least if I was involved in the project, I would say, as a community, we're going to pony up our property taxes. We're going to knock down the building that's currently on Lock Former. We're going to regrade it. We're going to put in some drainage to make sure there isn't runoff into the creek behind there and that there's not pooling of water. Like, there's things that are necessary on that property that I do think are TIF eligible legitimately, but I'm not convinced the differential between what's being asked by Lock Former and what's wanting to be spent between the two has been communicated to us.
I know we're focusing on Lock Former, but there's a lot of other plots in there, right?
They're negligible in my opinion. I mean, the heavy lift.
Yes, and so the Lock Former is the
Big one.
the big one, right? And I think part of the reason why that's kind of a weird map is that it has to be contiguous too, if I remember reading something in here. So how quickly can we get with the village to kind of close these gaps if we're lacking information? And we do have Mayor Mullen behind you.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the party.
I think to echo what we all know is the Ogden Avenue has not been developed as we've all hoped if you compare to our neighbors, our downtown. I think as the board, we all agree we probably want to be good partners with the rest of the village. A TIF is not the entire picture. You do the development here, other parts of Lisle will get better, our property values go up, et cetera, et cetera. It's a kind of a domino effect and we have to start somewhere. certainly with the Lock Farmer property, there seems to be an opportunity there. It would be just a long line of losses if we don't get that one, right? I think that's, so I'd be in the interest of trying to work through any questions or gaps we have, if we could come to an agreement with the village on how this goes. It's part of the questions I asked, that each one of those probably has an RDA on its own, if there's room for us to negotiate in each individual RDA, so that we don't have such a gap between the frozen EAV of the properties and the rest of us, because that is the shift, tax burden shift to the rest of us. However, if they do go in there, non-commercial assessment of commercial value properties elsewhere outside of the TIF should also go up, because hopefully this is a domino effect of more people investing in Ogden and the rest of Lisle.
Growth there is undoubtedly a great thing. It's just a but for.
Yep.
Can it happen without using the school district's property taxes?
And
It's a large domino.
it's the very first one in there, so.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, we would pause all of this. We would get more information to be able to prove to the taxing bodies, but for the property taxes, we can't get this to work. And I can only speak for my personal opinion. I want it to work so bad. I just don't have the information to say it doesn't work yet.
Has there been any expectation from the village that we will get this information, or when?
We need to vote on this on Wednesday, and it will pass because it's 4-3 based on what we know if the school district votes no, and it will move forward.
Do we know of any businesses that are potentially interested with a TIF?
As I mentioned, I thought it was shared at one of the joint review board meetings. There's been a number of contracts between Lock Former and interested parties, but we don't know the details of the who and why they walked away from the project. And so that, I think, would be really helpful to know if, no matter how much money was invested in that area, it wouldn't have worked, or whether it was close if we just fill in the blank. But I don't think the village has been part of those conversations to this point, short of the most recent one. But I do think an individual spoke at the last hearing, some guy named Joe, who was very interested in developing his property. And I think that the Quick Trip is very interested in developing their property.
And I think, for the one individual, that Joe has had it up for sale for some time and had offers along the way, but it just didn't work out. We have someone in the audience that I think was raising her hand, and since she is the mayor of Lisle, I think if you wanted to speak, I think we'd all like to hear what you have to say.
No objections.
Thank you. I did want to, I didn't realize this was going to be done in committee rather than the board meeting at 7:30, so I was at the library board talking to them about this a few minutes ago. So I ran over here. There's a lot. So I just want to start with, this started before I became mayor, while I was trustee, and I was a proponent then, and I'm a proponent now. There has been past interest in Lock Former, as Keith said, but the 3 projects that came forward and had some discussion with the village all fell through because the banks wouldn't finance them, and because of the risk that they perceived because of the hazardous nature of Lock Former. It's been remediated to the maximum extent possible. I have told the story a couple of times that when the analogy I use is when I went through cancer treatment, at the end of treatment, they don't tell you you're cancer-free. They say there's no evidence of disease because there's probably something still in there. There's probably a little bit of cancer floating around that they just continue to treat through medication. Same thing. This site is remediated to the maximum extent practical. It is still not allowed to be dug further than 5 feet deep below the grade elevation, which severely limits the type of development you can have there. And the hazardous nature of what lies below those 5 feet, a little bit of plume still may be there. There's hazardous soils and corrosive soils as a result of the dumping that was done on that site. So it scares banks. All of those banks, pretty much the reason all of them fell through is they could not get their financing lined up because the bank saw it as too high risk of an investment. That's why TIF is on the table. The extent of the TIF district is the whole corridor, and as, I was gonna say, you guys trustees or commissioners or trustee? Board, member Helderly. As member Helderly mentioned, they do have to be contiguous. So if we want to capture areas that are blighted, we have to capture the entire route through there. Now, the very first JRB meeting that we had, it was brought up that it seemed unfair for the village to be doing a TIF along this corridor and trying to pay for things that seemed like it should be a capital improvement project under the village. And I think that was a very fair point that was made. So as a result, I'm saying that, and I'll put it into intergovernmental agreements, whatever you want to use to document it, that we won't do streetscaping, we won't improve Ogden corridor explicitly using TIF money. I want that TIF money to go as much into incentivizing development as possible. The only thing that I know that we would want to do is do some stormwater improvements in a property adjacent where we have it in our master plan to make the Lock Former area and some of the surrounding areas less flood prone and try and bring down the flooding in those areas so they are more developable and more interesting to potential developers. I do want to talk about the but for. So because this is a district and it is a corridor, we don't get financial information at this stage. This is a top-down financial assessment, not bottoms-up. So this isn't, let's pull together all of the potential investors and see what money they need and then put that forward. The way the $32.5 million total bucket, which is 20 million of that is set aside to go towards the incentive or public improvements, that amount is determined by looking at the whole district, what the frozen rate would be, and then what the estimate is of each year after year, what the value increase would be if that area was fully developed. So it starts to go up. Only this money in that, under the curve, is what is going into that $32.5 million of the TIF. So this is not money, that tax money that would be coming to you at all in the future. This isn't $32.5 million being pulled out of the tax rolls. This is increment that would not exist if not for the TIF. And in this case, because we can't put together pro formas of every individual development because a TIF district is a little bit more of a if you build it, they will come situation. Because of that, we can only say this is the maximum extent of the TIF. Here's the 20 million is the maximum that we will be using to incentivize or do improvements in this area. And if we didn't make that incentive available, we would continue to have what we have today. And what we have today is a couple of businesses that are doing it right. Speedway, which gets knocked over once a month. Not a safe area, not a lighted area, not a well-traveled area, other than people shooting through. People don't pause, they don't stop, they don't do other things. Yes, there's a gas station looking to go there, Quick Trip, but they purchased a property already. Most of that money would be incentive that would be go towards towards that. They're not going to be leveraging the increment funding, and they may not be developing it for a couple of years. You mentioned Buc-ee's. We had a Buc-ee's. It fell through at Yackley. No, we really did. The mobile at Yackley and Ogden was supposed to convert to a Buc-ee's with, and we approved it, with an O'Reilly's next door, and they pulled out. The Ogden corridor in Lisle is something that people drive through right now. They don't stop and utilize any of the businesses in that area. So the point of this TIF is to bring in developers and try and make it more feasible to develop the Lock Former site. The other benefit we get with the corridor TIF is as that site redevelops in particular, it's going to bring everybody up. And as it brings everybody up, everybody's tax or EAVs will go up alongside them. And that's all additional increment that can feed into the TIF. If we only did a project-specific TIF, like just the Lock Former property, it would never alone generate enough increment to incentivize the developer to come in. Essentially what we're going to be doing with incentive money is incentivizing developer to build because there's going to be a shortfall of what the bank is interested in giving them because it's such a high-risk area. At the end of the day, that's the main thing. So the but-for question is not about financials and details of the gap. The but-for question is a policy-level question. And it's a policy question of, do you believe that in the next 20 years, this area could redevelop it to meet the village's goals and needs without anything else happening? It's been sitting there. Since I moved back here, we moved back here in 2012, and it was shortly after that the EPA said you could go ahead and rebuild Lock Former. Nothing's happened. The Joe that you mentioned across the vacant parcel across from the post office, nothing's happened, and he's had interest, but they never want to move forward. There's the Speedway, like I said, which I can't imagine they're making a lot of money when you get robbed so frequently. And I've seen at least 3 places turn over where the Windows place is, that is where the Quick Trip will be going after they get past all of this. So it's not a financial nitty-gritty gap question, it's a policy question. Can you imagine that this will develop into what we would like to see it in a reasonable time frame? I really don't think we can. And I think the history of this area has shown that. The village has made some poor decisions in the past by not doing streetscaping, not putting in lights, not doing the things that we are supposed to do, and we'll do that ourselves. We'll use our own capital improvement money, we'll take care of that. But this isn't taking money that would be yours otherwise. Without an improvement in this area, particularly in such a large space of Lock Former, which everyone's been scared off of purely because of the environmental background, which is not going to change. Without that redevelopment, this area will never see the kind of EAV that is projected in the TIF. You'll never see millions of dollars in EAV generated each year until we go through this process. Now, I will say too that there's a lot of motion with the TIFs. We have 2 active down west in the village and the one downtown. The one downtown didn't pan out. If I had my druthers, they would have. We were well on the way, and it should have happened, but it didn't. The other TIFs are Navistar and UTI. UTI is closing early. We are finishing it up this year. It has hit its cap, and we're going to be returning all that money to the districts of surplus this year. And then from here on out, that EAV growth that we've seen because of UTI is all yours. You're going to see the return on investment at UTI earlier than you thought you would. We're asking for the same leap of faith on Lock Former to get that same return on investment that we saw at UTI. And I'd love to answer any questions if you have.
Navistar, what's the status of Navistar?
Navistar is going to probably play out the entire 23-year period. They don't hit annually the employment marks that were outlined in the redevelopment agreement. So year to year, they get a portion of the incentive, and the portion of it goes back as surplus because they haven't qualified for the full incentive each year.
As people have come, or if anyone has come regarding the Lock Former property, have they talked TIF? Have they talked could we do if we got, I mean, it seems like that's what we're saying is backward. You know, if we knew that there was somebody that needed to and was going to use that if the TIF was provided. And
so I would say the reason we haven't probably done it, there's probably 2 reasons. A site-specific one alone wouldn't give them the incentive they need to build. Doing a district like this, you needed enough people to stand up and say you want to do it at the village, and I don't think that was something that there was the interest in doing for a long time. We've started this process a few months ago. It absolutely should have been much better communicated before we got to the point of standing up a joint review board, and that was on the village. I just lost your question in rambling.
just whether or not there was
yes.
expressed interest in using a TIF on the Lock Former
So
property.
in the previous iterations that I know of, and I know of 3 specific ones, I don't think a TIF came up. There might have been one that came up because I know they were talking to the assessor's office at the time, so they might have been trying to feel that out and see what their possibility was for a project-specific TIF, because I was at the township at the time. I will tell you, there is currently active interest on the Lock Former property. There is somebody who wants it, and they want a TIF to make it feasible. A lot of the details of that specific interested party are not something that's public information, but they've made it way further than anyone else has, and they're asking for a TIF to help support that process. And it would
That
be
seems like a
very viable-
logical process to develop that person of interest and talk about a TIF for that, and then build on that, and then expand, rather than doing the whole thing.
But the increment at the Lock Former property alone won't be enough incentive. You need the other parcels that will come up with it to make up the full incentive amount that will be likely needed. We're trying to make it as feasible as possible, knowing banks aren't going to put a lot of money into it. They're going to hesitate, and if they have this kind of commitment, it not only provides the funding for them, but it provides the resolve for the bank that the village is equally interested in this project and believes that it's sustainable.
Being that you've got the whole corridor there, will the village and planning zoning have more influence over how that will look and feel, being one continuous property there? In other words, you get off of 355, it'll look much better, continuous properties through there, as we've seen in our neighborhoods.
Right.
The other
Yes, because of the ability that we'll be writing, anybody who wants to at least
Advantage.
provide,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
get some incentive funding in order to do it. They would be going through the redevelopment agreement process, which is where we get all the financial information that Superintendent Filipiak mentioned around, here's the, the amount of money that we're putting in, here's what we're getting from the bank, here's the shortfall. That during the redevelopment agreement process is when we'll get those details.
But we don't know whether they would want to use it.
Right,
In all
we don't know.
cases. There
And
is
there's a
some
little bit of
vacant
first come,
land,
first
but
serve.
not all of them.
Yeah, if Lock Former comes in and needs all of it, we would write a redevelopment agreement with them, and that entire increment goes to that developer. More than likely, they won't need all of it, but then it makes it available for those other properties that are either vacant or blighted. And there may be successful businesses, there may be businesses, hanging on by a thread that are there. But it does make it available that people who want to come in and buy multiple lots, many parcels, package it together and put forth a development proposal, they would be eligible to ask for incentive money and put together an RDA.
And that would be, again, contingent on whether the businesses wanted to sell?
Right, totally. That would be the first conversation they
Right,
would have.
right.
But we have a few residential properties in here that in our comprehensive plan are actually preferred to be commercial industrial in the future. So if there was a developer that wanted to kind of take a big swath of those and redevelop it, that's something that could happen along the way as well.
So it looks like there's 40 properties, if I look at all the pins and the so let's say 5 come in and they satisfy the 32.5 million. The remaining 35, EAV would never be frozen. Is that correct? Just the first 5?
So for the duration of the TIF, that the EAV is frozen.
For all
And that
40?
increment
all 40
above that
properties?
frozen amount gets returned into the village, who distributes it through the incentives, through the redevelopment agreement incentives. But, sorry, I was just scrolling through the PowerPoint presentation for one of the JRBs.
Mary Jo, while you're doing that, I just want, Mr. Nagler, would you like to extend the Finance Committee? I think we should get a consensus.
Yes, I was wondering about that. Are we comfortable with extending the meeting to at least 8 at this point? Pardon? So that's 7 minutes, yes. I know.
Can I propose 8:15 and
Yes.
then reevaluate?
If everyone's comfortable with 8:15, I am
Well,
comfortable.
I'll second
This is an
her
important
proposal.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, who was the,
Kate, and
think it was I
Kate.
proposed
Miss-
8:15.
Miss Foster, Miss Allman, thank you.
All in favor of that?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. Just wanted to take care of that technicality. Go ahead.
What was the previous question?
If there's, out of the 40 properties, if 5 came in and met the 32.5, does that mean the other 30, the EAVs of the remaining 35 would not be frozen?
No, the entire district
All
is frozen
40
for
would be
that
frozen,
duration.
okay.
Right. But if we get those areas, redevelopment agreements up to the $20 million improvements put together early, more than likely we'll be in the situation that UTI was in, where they cap out early and we close the TIF early. It really is a matter of how soon a developer comes in and gets in. So their benefit to be one of the first, because you know, the pot is bigger for you to ask for. And then the generated increment is much more. So if you try to improve, this is where we were with Family Square. We're at the 7 years into that TIF before we got a redevelopment agreement in place for Family Square. And that was 7 years that there was no additional increment generated. It just sat there. So they were down to 16 years that they were going to be able to hurry up and get some increment. So they didn't have available to them all of the incentive that they could have had if they started early and had that whole amount. So more than likely, if this happens soon and early, we close it early, return any surplus, and you guys get the return on investment sooner. And that's what this is. Economic development for the village is an investment right now. We need to invest some money to get people in the door. Yes, there's lots of development going around, but a lot of things are stagnant. We have not been successful in redeveloping areas that have been sitting vacant for a very long time in the village. And that is our focus right now. We believe it is one of the most important things that we can do as a village to keep the village sustainable. We don't have the economic resilience right now to survive a huge downturn in the same way we would if our commercial EAV was as supportive as our neighbors, and we didn't have to rely so heavily on the residential side of property taxes. We need that development to be diverse. We need to not rely solely on the residents for property taxes.
Mayor Jo, what incentives has the village provided to potential buyers in the past or developers?
So one of the things that we can do is a share in sales tax. We've done that with Westside Tractor. We have an agreement with them. That was one of their incentives for coming into Lisle. The use at Lock Former probably won't be retail, so there's no sales tax to be generated that you could even use that benefit. There are a few other tools, but all of them are more like the share in sales tax, where those are much smaller dollar value incentives that we can offer. That's something to bring a business into an existing facility, something like that. A huge property that needs full redevelopment. The TIF really is the only thing that provides enough bang for the buck to get them to seal the deal.
Is use of bonds ever been considered?
It's not very common on the municipal side. And when the idea has been suggested, it made a lot of people in Village Hall go, so it's just not something on the municipal side that's used nearly as frequently. And there wasn't a lot of appetite to pursue it when we had the discussion about it.
And my last question, and then I'll make sure everybody, but there are several eligible uses of TIF besides the development of that property. Has the village board projected what they may use some of that? I mean, is that a consideration in the desire to do this?
The village does have the ability to use some of the funding for our projects that would be eligible. And right now, the only thing that I know of that's on the table, it doesn't say that this would be the only thing, is the stormwater improvements in that area to reduce flooding. There are utility improvements we can do, things like that, that we could do. But like I said, the streetscaping, the lighting, things like that, we won't do. That's a commitment I've made that we'll handle that ourselves. We're not going to put that into the TIF.
But those other things that you just described before, the streetscaping, could be something that the village would do without a TIF?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if we had the funds available, yeah. And I know it looks like we do, but we have a lot of things that we haven't funded, so
We're all in the same
It goes
boat.
on the list, you know?
Kate, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was thinking of something that Dan just mentioned. Do you have examples of other towns that have done something similar in the area and had success as a result of using a TIF?
Sure. I was just talking to the mayor of Roselle over lunch. He's the president of DuPage Mayors and Managers, and they're just closing out one for their downtown. That was really successful. Downers Grove has had several that I know at least two of which kind of drove a lot of the development and restructuring that they had downtown and in the municipal area for Downers Grove. And then I sat on a joint review board for Woodridge when I was a township supervisor. They had one active that helped kind of like their little municipal center area, that they had one for that area too. All of those have been successful. They've all closed out, hitting their cap. You know, I think for us, Navistar is kind of the frustrating one, that it didn't really pan out the way we had hoped. And Family Square, we were very close to having really nice things, but that didn't quite happen. But every town does this. Roselle, Mayor Pekulski told me that they have 4 active TIFs right now, and they're all going really well and helping with redevelopment.
Any of this size, like I said, this is really large, which, you know, as you explain it more, that's pulling it together, but it just, the size gives me pause, and knowing that there are some cash, tax revenue businesses currently on there does give me some pause as well.
Sure, and that is absolutely why I offered to do the 2% increase on the frozen value, because there is growth in those pockets that have developed businesses. Bill K has growth, Speedway probably has growth. But overall, the district as a whole for the last 3 years hasn't kept up with CPI. So the areas that are growing, we want to make sure that we aren't making it more difficult for you guys to do your jobs by bringing that money back in. It doesn't have to be abated. I know that was opinion of some that it should go back as an abatement, but it's also something, if we put it through we would put it through an IGA that you could count on as revenue, and then that could be built into your budget and levying process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions? All right, then, well, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We appreciate you coming on board and giving us a personal presentation.
Thank you guys for giving me the chance. Thank you. Thank you, Keith.
If we could have Dr. Filipiak back. It did look like it got a bit comfortable there, but.
No, I can sit out there the whole meeting if you want.
So I guess to wrap it, do you need guidance now as to say yes, no, or abstain?
Yes.
Okay.
Question, though. Is there anything you'd like to add to that conversation, or?
I'm just a different breed. I mean, as I've mentioned, and you know, I'm a CPA, I'm an MBA. I used to do mergers and acquisitions. I was on both sides of the sale and the purchase. And so I'm run on a different frequency. And so when it is very, trust us, do you feel this way? I mean, I've been bred not to feel, I've been bred to see the numbers and see the numbers don't work unless we. So you may feel differently. I think we're all passionate about Lisle. We want to see it grow. None of us have the ability to know either way whether it would or wouldn't happen without property taxes, but I have not physically seen the numbers to show me that but for the school district's property taxes, we wouldn't see that area develop. So it's your decision. I will vote however you decide.
So as a matter of procedure, we normally don't vote in the Finance Committee.
Right.
How do we handle these when they've come up before?
Well, we would just do a straw poll of what our feelings are on whether we would support this, to provide direction.
So should I do that by board member?
Sure, you can go around and see.
So Ms. Novosel, do you?
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me.
Pass.
Abstain. Am I my vote, or am I giving my thoughts?
No,
What
you
am I
just
doing
want to
with my
know,
thoughts?
what would you?
How do you want Keith to vote?
How do you
on
want Keith
Wednesday?
to vote?
Yes, no, or abstain?
Yeah.
You can't start with
If
a
you
newest
need-
board member. That is so not fair.
You know what?
You should go by
I
seniority.
do feel as though perhaps I should have gone by seniority.
But let me just give my thoughts. I think that Mayor Mullen, I appreciate you coming. There's a lot of really good information. But I feel like it requires some thought that we don't have time for right now. And so I feel like if I were forced to vote, I would probably abstain because I just don't feel like I have the time to reflect on the information we received tonight.
Ms. Foster,
I'll agree with you on it's just a lot to really take in, but we do have to make a quick decision. And I would also like to see a little bit more on the data side, like driving a decision. I mean, it sounds like I like the thought process behind it. I like the enthusiasm and the intention behind it. I would love to see that area redeveloped. I've lived around here for more years than I'm going to share, but like I am leaning towards no at this point for the whole piece.
Mr. Helderly?
I lean towards yes. I think I started with abstain, but I think I lean towards yes. Largely, the incentive of the 2% is important. The fact that we'll have some say on each individual RDA. The fact that it seems to be the Lock Farm property is the linchpin.
Can I pause? We won't have say on the individual RDA. The village will have
We have
the
no
decision.
say on that.
No say.
This is your
Okay.
only say in the process.
All right. Seems Lock Farm is the linchpin, and it's hard to do any of this without that one aspect. So I would agree with this one. I know we have a second TIF to come up with.
We haven't had the presentation on that yet, so we'll
Correct.
bring that to our next board meeting.
Yes. So for this one, largely for the Lock Farm property, I am a yes.
Ms. Almond?
Based on the use of the district's funds at this time, since what we're facing, I would be a no at this point. We all want to see progress in the village. I just am concerned about the amount of money that it would impact us.
Ms. Simmons?
I kind of agree with some of the other members of the board in that it's hard to make a decision without knowing if they really have to use our property taxes. I also don't like the fact that we're having to cut so much out of our budget this year because we will have a shortfall next year. And to give away money that, I know it's not money yet, but like to say, yeah, we're okay with giving this away when we're going to have to cut services or, I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I think I'm a nay.
So from my point of view, while I'm concerned about mirroring Ms. Sims, with our projected budget crunch, I'm very concerned about where we're going to have to cut. And there are a lot of unknowns in this process. So I'm going to have to say that I'm probably a no. Mr. Di Domenico?
I can echo what a lot of my colleagues here have said. Because of the size of the project and that we don't have information about what other tools we might use before using the tools of the district's finances and the current state of our budget, I would be a no at this point too.
So, Dr. Flipiak, I gather from our informal poll that the board feels that a no is appropriate at this time.
And I think the critical word is at this time. I mean, I am personally, although not a voting member, wanting to see the development. I would just like to see more information to be able to feel the pressure of but for the property taxes of the school district, this project would not go through. And I can't help but feel like we would all have all 7 of you support that. You just need to see the numbers to be able to show that's true.
Totally agree. Thank you. Yeah.
And so we're moving the discussion from about Route 53, I gather, then to the next board meeting?
We will share the information of how the vote played out for the East Ogden, and then that same day, we're going to get a presentation on the Route 53, and we'll share that at the July meeting with you.
Excellent, thank you very much.
And again, we want to thank the mayor for taking the time to come and present, and we appreciate your thoughts on it and your insight, for sure.
And we'd be glad to have any future engagement. You can call ahead and we'd put you on the agenda so that we can budget time for it. Thank you. All right, so after that long discussion, we are to agenda topics for future Finance Committee meetings. Any presented? No? I gather that the other TIF will be built in, so we won't add that there. All right, so with no other agenda items, I will obtain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Allman, Ms. Foster. Therefore, the Finance Committee is adjourned at 8:09. Thank you very much for all sitting through this extended edition of the Finance Committee meeting of School District 202. Good day.